Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're entering one of Japan's most unsettling traditions. Imagine pledging yourself to someone no longer alive. Would you marry a ghost? This isn't just legend, it's a ritual whispered across villages, and tonight's story insists some vows refuse to break, even beneath the grave. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Past midnight? Early morning? Spirits pay attention to hours. Your answer might matter more than you think. Share it below. I'm curious how many of you are listening at dangerous hours. Ghost marriages are often associated with Chinese culture, but Japan carries its own haunting echoes. Promises unfulfilled in life are believed to trap souls, restless and incomplete. Families feared ignoring such vows invited misfortune. This story, kept alive through whispers, shows how one family confronted love, death, and something between. It begins, as many tales do, with joy, anticipation, and family bonds. A wedding promised, laughter around dinner, a future carefully planned. But beneath celebration, shadows wait. Because in Japan, when vows collapse through sudden death, they sometimes don't end. They continue, and when they continue, they demand recognition. Older traditions say an unmarried spirit may wander, unsatisfied, seeking completion. A wedding unfulfilled might tether a soul, returning them again and again. In quiet villages, such beliefs carried weight. People feared unfinished vows might curse households. That fear explains why some chose ceremonies binding the living with the dead. This story surfaced from a family outside Sendai, where fields stretch endlessly and shrines line narrow roads. Aiko, the younger daughter, remembers every moment with sharp detail. For her, it was no folktale. It was the night grief turned ritual. It was the year her sister Hana chose differently. Life was simple before tragedy. Their father tilled the fields. Their mother kept tatami rooms neat, laughter filling evenings. Hana, the eldest, was engaged to marry a spring ceremony planned. The family believed their future was certain, yet one storm shattered everything. The fiancé died, and with him expectations collapsed. For most, mourning replaces marriage, but Hana insisted her vows remained. "He's waiting," she whispered, words unsettling everyone. Aiko, listening from doorways, swore Hana spoke as if answering another voice. Parents dismissed it as grief, but Hana's eyes seemed fixed somewhere else, gazing at someone unseen, someone she refused abandoning. In small towns, superstitions breathe louder. Neighbors whispered warnings, ignore unfinished vows and spirits grow vengeful. The family resisted Hana's pleas, calling them madness. Yet when small disturbances began, unlatched doors, objects moved, they grew hesitant. Whether imagination or not, fear spread. Soon the idea of ritual no longer sounded impossible. Japan's ghost marriages sometimes used dolls, strands of hair, or ancestral plaques, believed to anchor spirits. Priests guided rituals, binding the living with the dead. Hana wanted this union. She didn't call it superstition, she called it love. For her, vows unkept meant haunting. She wouldn't risk leaving him restless. Aiko remembers evenings heavy with silence. Hana set 2 bowls at the altar, leaving offerings for both herself and the unseen fiancé. Shadows lengthened strangely. Once Aiko found delicate footprints marked in fallen ash. None matched her family. Something was present, patient, waiting, just beyond sight, demanding acknowledgement they hadn't yet given. Strangeness escalated. A ribbon Aiko never owned appeared on her pillow. Candles flickered without wind. Tatami mats creaked under invisible steps. Hana seemed half here, half elsewhere. Parents argued behind doors, voices strained. The house no longer felt safe. Belief pressed in, and with it surrender. The family relented. They found a priest accustomed to forbidden requests. Preparations hushed through the household. Incense, ancestral plaques, red strings, ritual chants. The wedding would proceed, though one partner was already gone. Aiko recalls her sister's calm, as though relieved. What terrified the family most was how natural it seemed for Hana. The ceremony would bind her to someone unseen. The priest warned such unions weren't symbolic, they were binding. Once complete, separation would require another ritual. But Hana didn't hesitate. She accepted every step, every offering. For her, the ceremony wasn't grim, it was fulfillment. For Aiko, it was terror disguised as devotion. So tonight, as you hear this, ask yourself, what would you choose? Some promises end with death. Some remain unbroken, even when silence replaces breath. If someone you loved asked marriage from beyond, would you accept? Listen carefully, because Hana's choice wasn't unique. In Japan, such vows sometimes never truly end. Aiko remembers those days clearly. Their house outside Sendai was small, wood-framed, with paper doors and tatami floors that creaked softly. A family altar flickered most evenings, incense threading into the rafters like a second breath. Life looked ordinary. Father worked the fields, mother cooked, Hana planned spring wedding details. Even ordinary days carried small superstitions. No shoes on tatami, no whistling after dark, bow twice before the altar, never turn your back rudely. Aiko followed rules because everyone did. She liked their safety, the way rituals pinned the day like needles through cloth. Riku visited often after work, hands rough from timber, pockets full of odd screws and string. He laughed quietly and folded paper cranes for Aiko, leaving them on windowsills like watchful birds. When wind moved the paper wings, she felt protected. On the night everything changed. Clouds spilled in low and heavy, lanterns trembled, radios hissed. Neighbors hurried laundry off lines as the storm gathered. Hana set her bridal kimono aside and checked the doors twice. Aiko traced raindrops across the glass and felt a pressure in her ears, like someone whispering close. The call arrived near dusk, a collapse at the yard, Riku trapped. Aiko remembered her mother's bowl slipping from wet hands, rice scattering like teeth across the floor. They ran into the rain, through streets that seemed thinner than before. By the time they reached the gate, silence had already prepared the answer. Nothing living moved behind the tarps for them. After the funeral arrangements began, the house changed temperature. Doors stuck, tea cooled too quickly. Incense burned crooked, smoke leaning toward Hana's room, as though drawn by breath. Visitors offered condolences, but their eyes kept sliding to the altar, as if expecting someone to answer from the wooden tablets. Hana barely slept. She sat near the altar with Riku's photograph, tracing the scar on his thumb where the saw once slipped. She kept his shirt folded perfectly, smoothing the fabric whenever wind pressed through the shutters. Aiko heard whispering at night, too soft for words, too steady for imagination. There were small sounds, measured and polite, like someone avoiding notice. A cup clicked once without a hand. Floorboards sighed when no one crossed them. Aiko told herself wood settles with weather, yet the noises followed a pacing rhythm she recognized from Riku's evenings. 6 slow steps, turn, 6 again. Neighbors brought rice, salt, and paper charms. They urged prayers for release. Some suggested the wedding be acknowledged symbolically, just enough to calm whatever might be lingering. Their voices lowered when they spoke of unfinished vows, as though speaking loudly could wake the wrong listener. At night, Aiko kept the cranes beside her pillow. Their wings stirred in drafts she could not find. Once, a crane rotated until it faced the doorway. Another time, 2 cranes changed places while she blinked. None of it proved anything. It only felt like being watched, gently, by a presence unwilling to leave yet. There. Grief made routines feel ceremonial. Father lit incense each dawn, bowing twice, clapping to summon attention. Mother arranged fruit, salt, and water. Aiko swept before the altar with strokes, careful not to disturb ash patterns that sometimes looked like fingerprints. Hana added a second bowl beside the first. The cat from next door stopped at their threshold, fur rising, eyes narrowed at the corridor to Hana's room. It would not step inside, but watched the empty air as though something moved there. When Aiko reached to pet it, the animal retreated, tail low, emitting a sound like warning. Clocks drifted. One paused at 11:19, then resumed. The kitchen radio crackled between stations, picking up a woman's voice counting softly in a dialect Aiko could almost follow. On paper doors, damp circles appeared, and dried without explanation, as if a wet hand tested the grain and vanished. Aiko tried to rationalize every sign. Houses breathe, wood swells, storms change pressure, yet patterns kept returning to the same corners, the same steps, the same table where Riku liked to sit. Once Aiko found a small screw on the floor beneath his favorite chair. It was clean. It did not belong. That evening, Hana folded her kimono away, wrapped in white cloth, and placed it near the altar. She whispered something Aiko could not hear, then smiled in a way that made Aiko feel colder. It was the smile of someone listening to reassurance from a person you cannot see standing nearby. Word traveled through the neighborhood quickly. A retired shrine attendant visited with polite concern and left a packet of salt, advising discreet purification. He did not linger near Hana's door. He looked past Aiko once, as if shading his eyes from sunlight, although the hallway was dim. Hana began setting a cup of tea for Riku at dusk. Steam drifted across the empty place and curled toward the altar. The tea cooled untouched, yet the meniscus sometimes trembled like breath disturbed it. Aiko started noticing a scent of wet cedar without rain, the same smell that clung to Riku's jacket. Late one evening, a row of bells above the kitchen doorway chimed once, then stopped. The windows were latched. No draft touched Aiko's skin. She marked the salt line along the threshold with chalk. In the morning, the line held everywhere except for two faint smudges shaped like steps. Their parents argued in whispers, deciding whether to consult a priest. Mother feared ridicule. Father feared escalation. Hana settled the matter without debate. She said the wedding would still happen, and waiting made things worse. Her voice was steady. It was the steadiness that chilled Aiko more than any noise. That night, Aiko woke to counting again. Softer now, measured, patient. She followed it to the corridor. The paper door to Hana's room breathed inward and outward, as if someone leaned against it from the other side. When Aiko called her sister's name, the counting stopped, replaced by a comforting sigh. Days folded over each other, until time felt looped. The paper cranes on Aiko's window arranged themselves into a circle, mourning though she had left them scattered. Riku's photograph shifted toward Hana's seat without hand. The kimono fabric felt cool and damp, though the room was dry. She felt the air press against her cheek like a hand refusing be seen. Small proofs accumulated. A ring formed on the table where no cup had rested. A thread snagged on a chair back that no one had brushed. The cat watched the hallway from the threshold, ears angled toward nothing. Aiko began to step wider around places where footsteps paused. Visitors stopped staying long. They spoke from the doorway, offered bags of rice, avoided meeting Aiko's eyes. Some urged letting go. Others insisted commitments should be honored or risk consequences no one wanted named. The house listened whenever they said consequences, cataloging promises and debts. Hana asked for the priest. She had chosen the date. It would be held quietly, with witnesses before sunrise. Incense, cords, names, a vessel. She listed the items calmly, as if reciting a recipe learned in childhood. Mother trembled. Father nodded once, surrendering to necessity. That night, Aiko placed a crane on the altar and whispered a prayer for ordinary mornings. The bell at the temple answered with a note that sounded almost like consent. Almost. Somewhere, a floorboard settled. Somewhere, counting resumed. 6 steps, turn, 6 again. Dawn would bring arrangements no one could undo. The days before the ritual felt rehearsed, as if the house practiced breathing with something unseen. Offerings multiplied on the altar, rice crusted too quickly, fruit bruised overnight, incense coiled into crooked spirals that refused to rise straight. Doors ticked in their frames, lantern glass clouded without smoke. Everyone pretended not to notice, yet every gesture slowed respectfully, like bowing when no one else is bowing. Aiko sensed presences most after midnight. Paper screens seemed to swell outward, as though brushed by a shoulder. Shadows leaned away from lantern flames. Twice she woke to a damp patch on her futon shaped like a handprint, warm at the center, cooling at the edges. Hana moved like a bride still preparing, brushing her hair in long strokes, and humming uneven melodies Aiko didn't recognize. When Aiko asked, Hana murmured, "He likes this song," and kept humming toward the empty space beside her. Their parents stopped arguing. Meals shrank to bowls of rice and pickles. Father lit incense mechanically. Mother folded linens until creases stood up. Both avoided Hana's doorway, stepping past as if a sleeping animal lay across it. Neighbors drifted to distant corners of the lane. Salt lines chalked along thresholds blurred after rain. Rumors marched ahead of them. The family had invited misfortune. The dead disliked being kept waiting. Aiko watched 3 shadows cross a screen, when only 2 bodies stood inside the room, and felt the house holding its breath for an answer. Outside, even crickets paused between chirps. That evening a tapping began overhead, 2 measured for weather or vermin. 3, pause, 3 again. Aiko climbed the ladder with a lantern and found dust shaped like footprints circling the rafters. In the corner, an origami crane rested where she had never placed one. Its wings trembled though the attic air was breathless. She carried it downstairs. Hana received it without surprise, placed it beside the incense bowl, and whispered thanks into the smoke. Aiko asked who she was thanking. Hana only smiled, stroking the folded paper as if stroking a cheek. After that, the tapping learned the house. It moved from ceiling to floor, from corridor to kitchen, always patient like someone practicing the route between rooms. Father hammered nails into beams and claimed expansion. The rhythm continued, precise as counting. The priest visited to confirm arrangements. He halted just inside the threshold, eyes on the floor, and set down a small dish of salt. "Delay invites trouble," he said. "Light incense at dusk and at midnight. Keep doors latched, but offer water." His gaze flicked toward the empty chair at the table, then away. That night the cedar smell returned, stronger, cleaner than rain. The cranes on Aiko's windowsill shifted while she watched, pivoting until every beak faced Hana's room. She whispered her sister's name. From behind the paper screen, Hana answered first, sleepy and contented. "I know. He is outside." A gust pressed the screen inward and smoothed it flat again. Somewhere bells chimed once, listening. The days narrowed into preparations. The family left an empty setting at meals, chopsticks aligned, bowl waiting, chair angled slightly toward the altar. Incense smoke curved toward that space as if drawn by breath. Nobody mentioned it. Eyes slid past quickly, like stepping around a sleeping snake. Animals noticed most. Dogs along the lane howled at dusk and then together went silent, as if signaled. Birds stopped nesting under the eaves. The neighbor's cat crouched in their doorway nightly, pupils round, tracking something that drifted back and forth at knee height. Aiko tried explaining everything with grief and weather until she found the well ringed by floating beetles, perfect circle, not wind-scattered. The insect's legs pointed inward, like arranged hands reaching. She skimmed them away, returned at noon, and found the circle remade exactly, not one creature missing, not one offset. Hana spent afternoons brushing empty air beside her shoulder, smoothing invisible cloth, smiling and blushing as if to whispered jokes. When Aiko said her name, Hana's face brightened in dual recognition, the way people look when someone beside them speaks your thought aloud. Letters arrived from Riku's parents asking about memorials. Hana wrote back politely, promising prayers, promising peace. She sealed the envelope with a red thread tucked beneath the flap. That night, Aiko woke to counting in the corridor. 6 steps, turn, 6 again. She held her breath until the steps faded, and a soft sigh passed across her blanket, warm as a hand. She didn't call out. The night before the ritual arrived like a held breath. The priest's instructions were simple. Wash hands, light incense at midnight, keep salt lines clean, prepare a vessel, prepare names. Hana moved through the list calmly, as if repeating words whispered into her ear. Aiko tried to sleep, failed, and watched shadows pooling in corners where shadows shouldn't collect. The lantern flame narrowed to a thin blue needle and then jerked wider without draft. In her doorway, a silhouette gathered, broad-shouldered, head bowed slightly, precisely Riku's posture when he listened. Aiko blinked and saw only dark again, but the air retained a cedar warmth. Down the hall, the paper door to Hana's room pushed inward with a slow, intimate breath. No hand touched it. Hana whispered tomorrow, and the incense smoke swirled low around her shoulders like a veil settling. Before dawn, Aiko stepped into mist. Neighbors waited farther down the lane, not speaking, not approaching. Salt lines glimmered damply where rain had broken them. Someone made the sign for caution across a chest. The temple bell struck once by itself and did not swing again. When Aiko returned, Hana was kneeling perfectly still, kimono folded, eyes focused on space as if the wall had opened. For the first time, Aiko understood the shape of the silence in the house. Not emptiness, but company. Every sound balanced on that realization, like crockery stacked too high, waiting for the single touch that topples everything. Dawn trembled outside, thin and watchful, still. Before sunrise, the priest returned, solemn, coat damp with mist. He bowed to the altar and to the doorway, as though greeting two thresholds. He unpacked his tools deliberately, a wooden tablet, a red cord, a brush and ink, a lidded bowl that clinked faintly like water answering. Hana knelt, hair combed, kimono arranged, gaze unwavering. The priest spoke quietly about care. Once summoned, a bond expects acknowledgement. Once acknowledged, it requires tending. Neglect becomes a wound both sides feel. He asked for Riku's details. Hana recited name, birth date, hour, the day the promise was made. Aiko produced the keepsakes, a strand of hair, the shirt button Riku had replaced for her once, the paper crane that moved by itself. The priest drew characters on a narrow scroll and set it before the incense. The smoke bent toward the ink as if reading. He told them the binding would begin after the second bell from the temple. Until then, they must keep quiet. Water ready, salt unbroken, doors latched, windows open. Aiko didn't understand the contradiction, and decided rituals speak to two kinds of weather at once. Somewhere outside, dogs barked, then fell silent together. The first bell struck, slow and heavy, a sound that felt rounder than hearing. Hana's hands didn't tremble. Father's did. Mother's lips moved without sound. Aiko watched the lantern flame narrow into a thin white needle, and knew the house had already made its decision. The second bell gathered itself, waiting. Then it fell. The second bell rolled through the mist, heavy and final. The house seemed cupped by unseen hands. The priest lifted a red cord, dipped it in salted water, and laid it between Hana and the waiting seat. Incense flattened along the floor like ribbon, pointing toward the cord. Hana bowed, eyes shining. Aiko gripped her knees, nails denting skin. The priest began chanting, low and patient. The beams answered. With each phrase, the lantern flame leaned sideways, as though blown by a careful mouth. Father held his posture, shoulders trembling. Mother murmured prayers no one could hear. Then the first response arrived. The room pressed inward, cool yet weighty, as if someone had stepped inside. The cord quivered, lifted, and settled without touch. Hana whispered, "I'm here." Though her name was not spoken, the priest did not stop. His cadence thickened, sound woven against silence, until the rafters hummed. Incense spiraled upward in perfect loops. The flame stretched long enough to lick the lantern's rim. Shadows moved against the wall in the wrong direction, and stilled when the chant paused. Aiko tasted cedar and rain at the back of her tongue and understood what had joined them. They were no longer four. They were five. The family had made space for an unseen guest, and quiet accepted it. Aiko felt fingertips brush her sleeve, cool and deliberate, withdrawing the moment she noticed. Somewhere beyond the door a bell rope knocked softly, twice, without ringing. The house listened and did nothing. The priest asked for the vessel. Hana raised the wooden doll, its face unpainted, its robe marked with neat red strokes like wedding silk. Into the hollow she placed the scroll, the cedar-scented crane, and a knotted strand of Riku's hair kept in spring. She closed the back gently, as though tucking a child for sleep. When the last peg slid home, the robe fluttered without draft. Aiko thought the red deepened, as if fresh dye bled outward and settled. The priest announced, residence offered. Hana set the doll on the seat beside her. Instantly the tatami depressed under invisible weight. The sound was small, fabric against reed, but stubbornly real. Mother gasped. Father's jaw clenched. The red cord stretched between Hana and the seat, drawing taut like a vein. Smoke gathered around the doll's head and shaped into broader shoulders before loosening again. The temple bells chimed once, though no rope moved. The priest struck his gong in reply, sealing the moment. Footsteps crossed the room, steady 6 counted paces, turned 6 again, just behind Aiko's back. No weight dented the floorboards where she sat. The tea at the altar trembled and tipped, spreading in a ring that stopped at Hana's knees. Hana whispered something no one else heard, and smiled like a bride hearing her name. Aiko tasted cedar and iron. She knew recognition had passed between the worlds, and the house would not forget. Outside, wind pressed the eaves once, then retreated, as though warned away by neighbors. Chanting deepened until the beams seemed to hum. Air cooled. Aiko's breath showed like winter. Salt dishes trembled. Shadows climbed the walls, frantic and long, like figures trying to escape the room they had entered. The doll pressed harder into the tatami until reeds creaked in complaint. Hana closed her eyes and answered pauses only she heard, smiling, apologizing, promising language for one beloved listener. The priest's hands shook as he wrote characters in ash across the floor. Each mark darkened instantly, as if ink rose from beneath. Then every lantern extinguished at once. Darkness gathered, except for a faint red along the cord, glowing from within like wire. Aiko reached for Hana. Something passed first, cool, cedar-scented, brushing her wrist with deliberate care. The lantern sprang back brighter. Hana's kimono gleamed as though newly laundered. The doll rested against her shoulder without falling. Aiko whispered her name. Hana's mouth curved, eyes still closed, and she murmured, "He promised." A tremor shook the bowls until they rattled like teeth. The house vibrated faintly, approving. The priest changed pitch, voice thinning, threads pulled tighter through cloth. Outside, dogs started, barked once together, then fell still. From the hall came counting. 6 steps. Pause. 6 again. The counting stopped in the doorway, as if waiting to be invited. Hana breathed in, breathed out, and the cord quieted. Smoke curled into a ring and hovered, unbroken above the doll's head. Aiko realized the chant was not summoning something new, it was welcoming someone expected home. The final vow required a shared cup. The priest poured tea into 2 bowls, one before Hana, one before the groom's place. Hana drank first, hands steady, eyes closed. The second surface tightened, dimpled, rose, and fell, as if lips met water. Aiko heard swallowing. Terror enlarged the ordinary sound, until it filled her chest. The cord brightened briefly, then cooled. Air thickened, partitioned, as though a new wall now ran between altar and door. Father whispered enough through tears. Mother hid her face. Outside, dogs barked once, then yelped and quieted. The temple bell swung and struck by itself. Neighbors later swore they heard the note inside their dreams. In the hush, Hana opened her eyes. They were the same, and not something steadier looked through them, patient and sure, belonging to 2. She looked at Aiko with a kind, unfamiliar patience. Aiko said, "Sister," without meaning to speak. The doll inclined slightly as if acknowledging her too. The priest clanged the gong 3 times to close the passage. The flame steadied. The room did not. It felt rearranged, boundaries freshly drawn, like furniture moved in the dark. Hana bowed to the empty seat. The red cord lay quiet between them. On the tea, a faint skin traveled toward Hana's bowl and stopped. Aiko saw breath condense briefly above the second rim. Dust motes drifted against nothing, and changed direction twice. Somewhere the floor flexed like a step had pressed and lifted. No boards complained. Everyone waited, listening, together. They burned paper gifts, money, bedding, shirts, watching flames curl into fragile cranes and unwind midair. The priest declared the marriage sealed and warned them gently, honor offerings daily, remember dates, keep water clean, replace salt, greet at dusk. A neglected bond bruises both worlds. Aiko expected release. Instead, tension cinched tighter, rope wetted and pulled until knots locked. The doll remained on the mat, undeniably present. Hana placed her hand nearby and said, "Let's go home." Lanterns dimmed, then steadied. Tatami felt firmer, as if weighted by feet. When they left, Aiko heard another set of steps match theirs perfectly. At dinner, Hana pulled out a seat and placed the doll beside her. Mother hesitated, then set chopsticks in front of it. Hana bowed. "Please eat," Aiko echoed, voice unsteady. The air tasted faintly of cedar and iron. During the meal, an empty sleeve of Hana's kimono lifted once and settled. Tea formed a small ring where no cup had rested. Afterward, the cranes rustled on Aiko's windowsill. Though the night was windless, breathing joined hers from nowhere, calm and regular. The priest bowed at the threshold and left them to their new arrangement. The union was sealed. The household had expanded. Nothing of it felt imaginary anymore. In the quiet, Aiko wondered what it means to share a table with the unseen, forever. She pictured anniversaries kept with 2 bowls, journeys planned with an extra seat, and seasons measured by offerings. Outside, Lane listened. Inside, the house promised to remember. Morning arrived, but the atmosphere inside the house remained altered. The priest explained gently that what had taken place was not invention but continuation. In Chinese belief, it is called Minghuan, marriage in the underworld. In Japan, similar traditions existed, though rarely spoken aloud. Rural villages carried them quietly through centuries. A spirit who dies unmarried risks becoming restless, he said. Without fulfillment, they wander. Without a partner, they may drift back, seeking completion in any way possible. Families feared this above all, because restless spirits rarely arrive gently. They return with expectation. The ritual Hana performed was meant to prevent such unrest. The doll was not a decoration, nor the cord mere string. Together they formed a vessel and a path, giving the departed an address. Rituals assigned the spirit duty. Offerings gave it routine. By binding Hana to Riku through ceremony, balance returned. The haunting did not end. It acquired rules instead. The priest's warning was clear. Once tied, such unions rarely release. Neglecting the bond can provoke consequences: illness, strange accidents, voices at bedsides. Attention keeps it peaceful. Forgetfulness feeds unrest. Aiko realized then that the weight in her chest was no longer grief alone. It was a tether pulling them into another household. Every cedar breath confirmed the union was real. They had invited more than memory. They had given marriage to something invisible, and now their home belonged to 2 maps at once, one rooted in earth, the other rooted firmly in shadows that never left. Marriage in Japan has always extended beyond 2 individuals. It links families, land, shrines, and obligations. An unfulfilled vow was considered not only tragic but dangerous. When a bride or groom died before the ceremony, older villagers feared imbalance. An unmarried spirit might become an onyo, punishing with relentless precision. Symbolic anchors prevented that drift. A doll, an ancestral tablet, a robe folded carefully, each became a dwelling. Once anchored, the spirit belonged, no longer roaming aimlessly. Ritual calendars maintained the arrangement. Rice offered daily, salt renewed weekly. Incense smoke carried names and dates. The haunting remained, but under discipline. Hana's case matched these whispered accounts too well. The cedar scent that lingered, 6 measured steps repeating, paper cranes rearranging themselves toward her room. Before the ritual, these signs unsettled. Afterward, they became ordinary. The family adapted quickly, making space without hesitation. Fear learned manners, and manners became household law. Aiko found this the most unsettling detail. The horror wasn't footsteps at night, or incense bending. The horror was how seamlessly everyone adjusted, setting chopsticks at an empty seat as though it were natural. They greeted silence politely, bowed toward shadows, and never questioned why. Ordinary became terrifying without anyone naming it. Language disguised fear. By calling it marriage, the family called it love. Aiko saw clearly. Hosting a husband sounds acceptable. Hosting a haunting does not. Words concealed dread. Words made it livable. Yet even livable fear carried weight, pressing into every corner of their lives until it shaped daily existence. The priest's last instruction clung to Aiko's memory. Do not confuse ritual with superstition. Treat it as contract. Folklore confirmed the warning. Families who tended their ghost marriages reported blessings. Houses quieted. Elders survived illness. Fields bore richly, others neglected rituals and suffered. Protection and punishment balanced on the same thread. Some unions became jealous. Spirits resisted new attachments, sabotaging courtships or souring pregnancies. Mirrors cracked, doors slammed, accidents multiplied. Others demanded constant offerings, punishing the smallest neglect with sudden fevers or streaks of bad luck. Once acknowledged, the dead expected respect equal to the living. Neglect insulted both worlds. Hana appeared transformed. She no longer sobbed against Riku's shirt. She laughed softly at unheard remarks. She asked Aiko to fetch 2 towels instead of 1, as though expecting them used. She no longer whispered into dark corners for comfort. She spoke confidently, certain her words reached attentive ears. For Aiko, this shift unsettled more than mourning ever had. Grief at least was visible. This new arrangement demanded faith without choice. She found herself bowing unconsciously when incense curled wrong, whispering gratitude at night before sleep. Fear disguised itself as reverence until reverence itself hardened into law. She began dreaming of cedar groves, where footsteps paralleled her own perfectly. She always woke grateful the rhythm persisted, then recoiled at her gratitude. Fear had softened into routine. Gratitude had disguised captivity. In time she realized she no longer resisted. She simply lived under contract, whether she accepted or not. Across Japan, fragments of these practices appear in records, ledgers, diaries, temple notes. In Tohoku especially, ghost marriages endured long into modern times. Some priests permitted them discreetly, others refused, advising alternative offerings. Scholars later reinterpreted them as grief rituals, but households themselves claimed otherwise. They insisted the unions were binding. Aiko grew older inside this contradiction. Outsiders dismissed strange events as superstition. Insiders called them etiquette. If silence thickened, someone had entered. If incense bent, someone listened. Etiquette demanded pause. Once acknowledged, life resumed. To deny would insult, and insult meant risk, so every disturbance became part of ordinary rhythm. Rituals offered dignity. They allowed the family to live without open terror. Yet dignity is not control. The household no longer belonged fully to them. Hana's joy returned. She carried herself with the serenity of a wife, even if her husband was unseen. The doll acquired a patina from constant care. For Aiko, peace came mixed with unease. She lived under household law, authored by 2 worlds. Anniversaries demanded attention. Meals required extra bowls. Shadows claimed space in conversations. Fear disguised itself as tradition. Tradition disguised itself as love. Aiko could not decide whether her sister had been saved or enclosed. She often wondered in silence whether Hana felt chosen or captured. Love can anchor the living. Love can also anchor the dead. The contract worked. The haunting remained. Nothing was undone. The marriage endured without ceremonies ending. Their family lived inside its shadow, always listening, always obeying. The story ends not with resolution, but with continuation. Hana's vow carried beyond her fiancé's death. Through ritual she secured marriage, and in doing so transformed her family's existence. Scholars may call it folklore, historians may record it as custom, but Aiko remembered it as daily reality, constant and inescapable. Ghost marriages reveal something unsettling about culture. Death is not a wall but a passage. Promises cross it. Vows outlive bodies. Families choose whether to acknowledge them. When they do, the house shifts. Bowls slide politely. Blankets straighten. Paper birds align their wings. Haunting learns manners, and manners rule ordinary days. The most terrifying part was ordinariness. Once fear adapts into etiquette, resistance dissolves. You bow at thresholds. Replace salt. Leave tea cooling beside empty seats. At first it feels temporary. Then it feels routine. Eventually, it feels inevitable. The line between haunting and household disappears into repetition disguised as devotion. Hana thrived in this order. She lived quietly, laughing into stillness, caring for her unseen husband as naturally as breathing. The family followed her lead, tending both altar and absence. Life went on, stable yet permanently altered. For Aiko, unease lingered in every silence. The footsteps never left. The cedar never faded. Years later, she admitted the truth. The marriage protected them, but it also claimed them. Some vows stretched too far to ever break. Hana's promise bound her family across the veil, and so they remained, living with shadows, tending rituals, inhabiting a household that no longer belonged entirely to the living. Hana's vow did not end with Riku's death. Through ritual, their marriage bound the living to the dead, and her family lived forever with cedar-scented air, footsteps on tatami, and a seat never left empty. What began as love became routine, and routine turned quietly into fear. Some promises never release their hold. Some unions continue in silence. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Rest well, take care of your own shadows, and I'll see you again next time.